I still remember the exact smell of their vomit mixed with $1,000 champagne when it hit the marble at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday. I was on my knees in penthouse 2401, gray uniforms soaked at the knees, pushing the mop across the floor while three couples in their late 20s laughed like hyenas. The tall guy in the navy blazer, some tech bro who never missed a chance to flash his Rolex, pointed right at me and said I looked like the kind of woman who probably ate out of the trash I emptied. His girlfriend, the one with the fake laugh and the Birkin that cost more than my annual salary, actually clapped. They thought it was hilarious. They thought I was nothing. I kept mopping, head down, no expression. 43 years of cleaning other people's messes had taught me that silence is the sharpest blade. What they didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that the quiet woman in the janitor's uniform owned every square foot of the structure they partied in. My son Michael had spent the last 9 years building a silent real estate empire, and I was his eyes on the ground. While they mocked me, I was cataloging every scratch on the Italian tile, every unauthorized sublet, every bounced damage deposit. I finished at 4:12 a.m., wheeled my cart to the service elevator, and rode it to the basement office no tenant had ever seen. The security monitors glowed soft blue. I poured myself coffee from the machine Michael had installed for me alone, then opened the folder I kept locked in the bottom drawer. Inside were bank statements, lease agreements, and the irrevocable trust documents that named me as the sole lifetime beneficiary of the entire 42-unit building at 1801 Harborview. Michael had set it up that way the day he closed on the property. Cash purchase, no mortgage, everything routed through a series of LLCs, so clean, even a forensic accountant would need 6 months to trace it back to us. They had no idea their rent checks were going straight into an account I co-signed. They had no idea the $18,400 security deposit they each put down last year had already been spent on custom renovations while they trashed the place. And they definitely had no idea that the janitor mom they just humiliated was the one who could end their cushy downtown lifestyle with a single signature. I sat there until sunrise, reviewing the footage from the Ring cameras I'd had installed in every common area. Crystal clear. Their faces, their words, their laughter. I saved 3 separate angles, time-stamped them, then burned the files to an encrypted drive. No anger, not yet, just the cold mechanical satisfaction of a plan that had been waiting years for the right match to strike. By 9 a.m., I was back in my small apartment on the ground floor, the one tenants assumed was for staff. Michael had wanted me to take a penthouse, but I refused. I needed to stay invisible. I called him on the encrypted line we use for building business. Michael, it happened last night in 2401, exactly like we discussed. His voice stayed calm, the same tone he used in boardrooms. How bad? Bad enough. Full audio and video. They crossed every line we set in the tenant code of conduct. He didn't sigh. He didn't curse. He simply said, I'll have the attorney start the 90-day notice to quit package today. Personal guarantees on all 3 couples. We'll pull their credit, run the forensic accounting on the damages, and enforce the deed restrictions they violated when they started that illegal short-term rental last month. You okay, Mom? I looked at the manila envelope already prepared on my kitchen counter, the one containing the first round of legal paperwork. I'm fine, just tired of pretending. That afternoon, the building manager, another one of Michael's loyal people, slipped the first notices under their doors while they were still nursing hangovers. I watched on the monitor as the tech bro in 2401 opened his envelope, read the bold header, Notice to Quit, Termination of Tenancy for Material Breach, and turned pale. His girlfriend snatched it, scanned the list of violations, unauthorized alterations, repeated noise complaints, documented property damage exceeding $47,000 across 3 units, and the personal guarantee clauses that made them jointly and severally liable for every penny. I could see their mouths moving on the silent feed, They were panicking. Good. By evening, the first desperate knock came on my apartment door. I opened it, still wearing the gray uniform, name tag reading simply, Rosa. The girlfriend from last night stood there, makeup smudged, trying to look sweet. She started babbling about how it was all a misunderstanding, how they were good tenants, how they'd fix everything. I just stared at her until she ran out of words. Then I spoke for the first time in her presence without a mop in my hands. You spent last night laughing while I cleaned your vomit and called me trash. Today the trash is serving you legal papers. Read them carefully. You have 90 days. I closed the door in her stunned face, slid the deadbolt, and poured myself a small bourbon. The glass felt heavy and perfect in my hand. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest felt lighter. This was only the beginning. The next 72 hours turned the building into a pressure cooker, and I was the one holding the valve. By Friday morning, the three couples from 2401 had formed their little war council in the lobby, voices carrying across the marble I'd polished the night before. They cornered the building manager, a retired Marine named Reyes, who'd been with Michael since the first LLC filing, and demanded to speak to the real owner. Reyes just handed them copies of the management agreement that listed the property under Harborview Holdings LLC, an entity whose sole member was an irrevocable trust with my name on the beneficiary line. No drama in his delivery, just facts. They didn't believe it. The tech bro, his name was Derek, I checked the lease, slammed the paper down and said there was no way some cleaning lady's family owned anything except a broom closet. His wife, the one with the Birkin, actually laughed again, that same brittle sound from the other night, and suggested they file a complaint with the city about elder abuse, because clearly I was being exploited by whoever ran the building. They wanted me removed immediately. They wanted my uniform privileges revoked. They wanted the whole staff fired and replaced with people who knew their place. I watched the entire exchange on the basement monitors while sipping coffee. Michael had wired the system with military-grade encryption the same month he transferred the deed. Every word they said was time-stamped and backed up to a server in a different state. I added the new footage to the folder that now held 4 separate incidents. The vomit night, the noise violation at 1:45 a.m., the following evening when they blasted music loud enough to shake the chandeliers, the unauthorized Airbnb guests they tried to sneak in through the service entrance, and now this coordinated harassment of staff. By Saturday, they escalated. Derek showed up at my ground floor apartment door at 10 a.m., wearing a suit like he was heading to court instead of a Saturday morning in a building he was about to lose. He tried the charm offensive first, told me he understood I was just doing my job, that maybe there had been a misunderstanding, that perhaps a little cash under the table could make the paperwork disappear. He actually pulled out a checkbook and offered me $5,000 to forget the whole thing. I looked at the check, then at him, and said nothing. He upped it to 10. I still said nothing. When he started threatening to have me investigated for falsifying maintenance logs, I simply handed him the second envelope I prepared the night before. Inside was a preliminary forensic accounting summary prepared by Michael's CPA, showing that the three couples together had caused documented damage of $52,300 in the last 14 months. Scratches on $18,000 countertops, cigarette burns in wool carpets, and water damage from an overflowing bathtub. They never reported. The summary also listed every late fee, every bounce check fee, and the illegal short-term rental income they'd failed to declare on their own taxes. At the bottom was a personal guarantee clause each of them had signed at move-in, making them jointly liable for the full amount plus legal fees. Derek's face went the color of old oatmeal. He started sputtering that this was extortion, that they had rights, that his father was a partner at a downtown law firm, and they would bury us in litigation. I closed the door before he finished the sentence. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there another 30 seconds, checkbook still in his hand, looking like a man who just realized the janitor he'd mocked might actually own the pen that could sign his eviction. That same afternoon, the other two couples joined the panic. I heard them through the thin walls of the laundry room while I folded the building's linens. Another job I insisted on keeping, so I stayed invisible. They were on speakerphone with Derek's father's firm, demanding an emergency hearing, claiming the notices were retaliatory because they'd complained about the unprofessional cleaning staff. The lawyer on the other end asked for proof of ownership. When they couldn't produce anything beyond some cleaning lady's son, the lawyer told them to stop talking and start packing. I smiled for the first time in days, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes but warms the blood anyway. Michael called me that evening on the encrypted line. He was in his office downtown, surrounded by the kind of paperwork that made bankers nervous. He'd already triggered the irrevocable trust enforcement provisions, which allowed the trustee, his attorney, to accelerate all remedies without my direct involvement. The 90-day notice to quit was now backed by a pending quiet title action to remove any cloud on the deed caused by their illegal sublets. He told me the forensic accountant would be on site Monday morning with a court-appointed inspector to catalog damages room by room. Photos, measurements, sworn affidavits. The works. I asked him if he was sure we were doing the right thing. Not because I had doubts, those had burned away the night they called me trash, but because I wanted to hear the steel in his voice one more time. He answered the same way he had 9 years earlier when he first proposed the trust. Mom, they signed the papers. They broke the rules. The building is yours to protect. I just made sure the law agrees with you. Sunday night, I was back on shift, mopping the same hallway outside 2401. The door was cracked open. Inside, I could see moving boxes already stacked against the wall, and the girlfriend crying into her phone about how they were going to lose their security deposits and face collections on the personal guarantees. Derek paced behind her, voice cracking as he told someone on the other end that his credit was about to get wrecked, and his firm might not make him partner if this showed up on a background check. They saw me through the gap. For a second, nobody moved. Then Derek stepped into the hallway, face twisted with the kind of rage that comes when rich people realize money can't fix everything. He started to say something ugly, something about teaching me my place, but I lifted the mop handle just enough to rest it against the wall and looked him dead in the eye. You laughed while I cleaned your mess, I told him quietly. Now the mess is yours. 90 days. Clock's ticking. I turned and walked away before he could answer, the wheels of my cart squeaking softly down the corridor like a countdown. Behind me, I heard the door slam so hard the frame rattled. The sound echoed off the marble and felt exactly like justice should. Cold, final, and completely earned. The bourbon tasted even better that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the manila envelopes spread out like a winning hand, the red light on the Ring camera blinking steady and patient above my front door. They still had 87 days left. I intended to enjoy every single one of them. The Monday morning inspection hit 2401 like a silent freight train. I was already on the floor at 7:45 a.m., restocking the service closet with fresh mop heads and industrial cleaner, when the elevator dinged and two men in dark suits stepped out carrying clipboards and hard-shell cases. One was the forensic accountant Michael had retained 3 days earlier, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla who specialized in tenant damage litigation across 3 states. The other was the court-appointed inspector, a retired building inspector with a badge that carried the weight of a judge's order. They didn't look at me twice. To them, I was just the gray uniformed staff member who handed them master keys and nodded when they asked for the access log. The tech bro Derek must have been watching from the peephole because the door flew open before they even knocked. He stood there in yesterday's sweatpants, hair wild, trying to block the hallway with his body like that would change anything. His girlfriend hovered behind him, eyes puffy, clutching a coffee mug like a shield. The other two couples spilled out from their units, forming a loose semicircle of designer loungewear and entitlement. They started talking over each other at the top of their lungs, insisting the inspection was illegal, that they had rights, that this was harassment because they had dared to question the cleaning staff. The girlfriend actually stepped forward and pointed at me, claiming I had a personal vendetta and that the whole thing was fabricated. I stood 3 feet away, inventory checklist in hand, and said nothing. The inspector simply handed Derek a copy of the court order authorizing the walkthrough, complete with the case number and the signature of the Superior Court judge who had reviewed the preliminary forensic summary over the weekend. Derek's hands shook as he took it. The paper trembled between his fingers like a leaf in a storm. Carla didn't waste breath on pleasantries. She powered up her tablet, pulled on nitrile gloves, and started in the living room. The inspector followed with a high-res camera and measuring tape. I stayed in the doorway, watching. Within the first 10 minutes, they found the first layer of rot. Cigarette burns hidden under throw rugs that had been rearranged since the last cleaning. Water stains on the baseboards from the overflowing tub they never reported. And fresh scratches on the $18,000 quartz island where someone had used it as a cutting board for something sharp enough to leave permanent grooves. Carla's voice stayed flat as she dictated findings into her recorder. Estimated repair cost per item, cross-referenced against the move-in condition report they had signed. By the time they reached the master bathroom, the numbers had already climbed past $29,000. That was when the girlfriend broke. She started pacing, voice cracking as she told anyone who would listen that this was all a setup, that I had probably damaged the place myself to frame them, that her family had connections and this would never hold up. Derek tried to shut her down, but it was too late. The inspector caught the exchange on body cam. I added it to the growing digital folder on my phone, another time-stamped piece of evidence showing attempted witness intimidation. While they moved to the second bedroom, I slipped downstairs to the basement office and opened the latest bank records Michael had forwarded. The 3 couples had filed a joint dispute with the management company last month, claiming uninhabitable conditions to withhold 2 months' rent, $14,700 total. The claim was bogus. The only issue was a minor HVAC filter change we had completed within 48 hours. What they didn't know was that Michael's LLC had already pulled their credit reports through legal channels. All 3 had maxed out cards, late payments on luxury leases, and a pattern of similar disputes at previous addresses. The forensic accountant's preliminary report now included those records, proving a deliberate pattern of financial abuse against property owners. Michael called on the encrypted line while the inspection continued upstairs. His voice was the same calm steel. He confirmed the legal team had filed for summary judgment on the personal guarantees that morning. The irrevocable trust language made it ironclad. No tenant could claim the owner was unreachable because the beneficiary clause listed me explicitly. He also mentioned the quiet title action was moving forward. Any illegal short-term rental income they had funneled through apps would now be clawed back as unjust enrichment. Another $28,400 traced through their Venmo and Cash App statements. The judge had already signed off on the asset freeze notice for their joint accounts if they tried to liquidate and run. I hung up and went back upstairs just as the group reached the balcony. The inspector found the illegal grill they had installed against every deed restriction and fire code in the building bylaws. Carla photographed the scorch marks on the railing, then turned and looked straight at the 3 couples. She recited the total projected damages so far, $67,800, and reminded them the personal guarantee made each of them liable for the full amount, not just their pro rata share. Joint and several. The words landed like hammer blows. Derek tried one last time. He stepped close enough that I could smell the stale bourbon on his breath and told me in a low voice that I had no idea who I was messing with, that his father's firm would have the notices thrown out by afternoon, that maybe I should think about my own future because janitors didn't win against people like them. I met his eyes without blinking and reminded him that the janitor had been documenting every word he said since the night they laughed at me on my knees in their vomit. The girlfriend started crying for real then, not the performative kind from the weekend, but the ugly, shoulder-shaking kind that comes when the paperwork finally sinks in. One of the other husbands actually sat down hard on the couch, head in his hands, muttering about how they were going to lose everything: the deposits, the guarantees, the credit scores that had taken years to rebuild after their last startup flameout. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply turned and wheeled my cart back into the hallway, the wheels squeaking the same steady rhythm they had for years. Behind me, the inspector's camera flashed again and again, each click another nail in the coffin they had built for themselves. By the time I reached the service elevator, the manila envelope for round 2 was already prepared on my kitchen counter back downstairs. The formal demand letter for the $67,800. The notice of intent to file liens on any vehicles registered to their names, and the preliminary findings from the short-term rental audit. I poured the bourbon a little earlier than usual that afternoon, the glass catching the late morning light through the blinds. The red light on the Ring camera above my door blinked once, patient and unblinking, recording the silence that now filled the building like a held breath. They still had 84 days, but the walls were already closing in, and every single one of them knew it. The days that followed the inspection settled into a rhythm of quiet dread for everyone except me. I kept my usual schedule: night shifts mopping corridors, restocking supplies, nodding politely when tenants passed, but every movement was calculated. The red light on the Ring cameras blinked steady above every doorway, capturing the way Derek and his group now avoided my eyes in the elevator, how they clustered together in the lobby, whispering about lawyers and appeals. Their attempts to rally other tenants as flying monkeys fell flat. Most residents had seen the inspection team and knew better than to get involved in someone else's self-inflicted collapse. Tuesday brought the next envelope. Michael's attorney had filed a motion to enforce the personal guarantees in civil court, attaching the forensic accountant's full report as Exhibit A. The document listed line-item damages with photographic evidence: $12,400 for countertop replacement, $9,800 for carpet remediation, including smoke and burn marks, $7,300 for balcony code violations that triggered an automatic fine from the city. Total now stood at $81,200 after adding legal preparation fees at the contractual rate of $450 per hour. I slipped copies under their doors myself at 3 a.m., the manila envelopes crisp and heavy in my hands, the faint smell of fresh printer ink mixing with the lemon disinfectant on my cart. By Wednesday, they were scrambling. I watched on the monitors as Derek paced his living room on speakerphone, with his father's firm, voice rising as he demanded they find a loophole in the irrevocable trust. The attorney on the line explained patiently that challenging the trust would require proving undue influence or incapacity, neither of which existed. My mental competency had never been in question, and the deed transfer had been executed 9 years earlier with full documentation. They tried another angle, claiming the building manager had forged signatures on the original leases. Reyes simply produced the notarized originals, each bearing their own wet ink signatures in the time-stamped video of them signing in the leasing office. The girlfriend took a different approach. She waited until I was alone in the mailroom, sorting packages, and cornered me near the locked tenant boxes. She launched into a tearful monologue about how stressed they all were, how this misunderstanding was ruining their lives, how perhaps we could settle privately for a fraction of the claimed damages if I would just call off the dogs. She even reached into her purse and pulled out a cashier's check for $25,000 made out to cash, sliding it across the counter like a bribe in a bad movie. I looked at the check, then at her, and reminded her that any attempt to circumvent the legal process would be documented as further evidence of bad faith. The camera in the corner caught every second. She snatched the check back and left, heels clicking angrily across the tile I had polished the night before. Michael called that evening while I sat at my kitchen table with the growing stack of yellowed receipts and bank statements spread out like battle maps. He confirmed the court had granted an expedited hearing for the summary judgment on the guarantees. The judge had reviewed the body cam footage from the inspection and the harassment logs. A temporary restraining order was now in play, preventing any tenant from approaching staff within 50 feet or interfering with building operations. The paperwork drop had landed with surgical precision. Their joint account, the one they used for rent and shared expenses, showed a sudden attempt to wire funds overseas the previous day. $42,000 routed through a shell account that the forensic accountant had already flagged. The bank had frozen it pending review under the personal guarantee clauses. I could hear the exhaustion in their voices through the thin walls that night. One of the husbands was on the phone with a realtor, trying to line up a short-term sublet for their furniture before the 90-day clock ran out. But every agency they contacted had already been notified of the pending liens. The deed restrictions Michael had placed on the units years earlier made any transfer of possession without owner approval a breach that accelerated the entire eviction timeline to 30 days if triggered. They were learning the hard way that paper cuts from legal documents bleed slower but deeper than any insult they could hurl. Thursday morning, I was in the basement reviewing the latest security footage when the beep of the system arming pulled me back to the present. Derek had tried to access the service elevator with a fake maintenance request, hoping to remove some of the damaged items before the final inventory. The camera caught him red-handed, and the alert went straight to my phone. I forwarded it to the attorney without comment. Another violation, another nail. By Friday, the tension in the building felt like static electricity before a storm. I passed the girlfriend in the hallway carrying a box of what looked like designer clothes to storage. She muttered under her breath that I was enjoying this, that I must be some kind of monster to watch people suffer like this. I stopped the cart, turned, and told her the only monster here was the one who had laughed while an older woman cleaned up their filth and then tried to destroy her livelihood with lies and bribes. She had no answer, just the crinkle of the legal documents in my pocket as I continued down the hall. That night I sat with the half-empty bourbon glass on the counter, the manila envelopes now numbered 1 through 5. The irrevocable trust had done its job perfectly, shielding the asset while giving me clean authority to act. Michael had built it that way on purpose, a fortress of paperwork designed to protect the one person who had worked nights for decades so he could build something clean. No emotion clouded my thinking, only the cold satisfaction of watching their world of entitlement crack under the exact rules they had signed without reading. They still had 71 days on paper, but the clock had already run out in every way that mattered. The next envelope would be the one that broke them completely, and I was ready to hand-deliver it with the same steady hands that had mopped their floors. The expedited hearing arrived faster than they expected, exactly as Michael's legal team had engineered it. I sat in the back row of the Superior Court courtroom on the following Tuesday morning, still in my gray uniform because I had come straight from the overnight shift, name tag reading Rosa like it always had. No one glanced twice at the older Latina woman in the corner. To the bailiff and the clerk, I was just another building employee there to observe. Derek, his girlfriend, and the other 2 couples filed in together, dressed like they were heading to a board meeting. Suits, pearls, the full performance of respectability. They never saw me. I made sure of that. The judge entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for cutting through entitlement like butter. Michael's attorney laid out the case in 20 crisp minutes. The irrevocable trust documents dated 9 years prior, the deed transfer recorded with the county, the personal guarantee clauses each of them had initialed in blood-red ink on move-in day. Exhibit after exhibit clicked onto the screen. Ring camera footage of the vomit night with their laughter crystal clear. The forensic accountant's itemized report now totaling $94,600 after the latest round of balcony repairs and HVAC remediation. The frozen wire transfer attempt flagged by the bank under anti-fraud protocols. The attorney reminded the court that the trust language made me the protected lifetime beneficiary, immune to any claim of undue influence or incapacity. Derek's father's firm had sent a junior associate, a slick kid who tried to argue retaliation and procedural defects. He claimed the notices to quit were issued in bad faith because of my personal grudge against the tenants. The judge stopped him mid-sentence, asked for proof of any policy violation on my part, and received nothing but stammering. She then turned to the body cam footage from the inspection where the girlfriend had accused me of fabricating damage. The audio played through the courtroom speakers, every ugly word echoing off the wood paneling. The judge's face never changed, but her pen moved across the order form like a guillotine. Judgment granted. The personal guarantees were enforceable immediately. The court affirmed the 90-day notice to quit, but accelerated the timeline to 45 days because of the documented pattern of bad faith conduct and the new restraining order violations. Liens were authorized on any vehicles or additional assets registered to their names. The short-term rental income, now traced to $31,200 through forensic accounting of their linked accounts, would be treated as unjust enrichment and clawed back directly from the security deposits they had already spent. The judge signed the order right there on the bench, and the clerk handed copies to both sides before we even stood. I watched from my seat as the color drained from their faces. Derek's girlfriend gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. One of the husbands actually whispered that this couldn't be happening, that they had paid good money for those units and deserved better. The associate tried to salvage something with a request for a stay pending appeal. The judge denied it on the spot, citing the clear and convincing evidence of ongoing financial abuse against the property owner. Case closed. 30 seconds later, the bailiff called the next matter, and the 6 of them shuffled out like people who had just watched their entire world get notarized into oblivion. I waited until the courtroom emptied before I stood. Michael had arranged for a courier to deliver the certified copies of the order directly to their doors that same afternoon, but I wanted to see the moment land in person. I rode the bus back to the building, the manila envelope containing my own copy resting on my lap like a loaded weapon. The stale perfume from an old tenant's abandoned cardigan lingered in the air of the service entrance when I let myself in through the back. I changed into fresh uniform and went straight to work on the 5th floor hallway, the same one they used every day. They returned an hour later. I heard their footsteps before I saw them, the hurried click of heels, the low, frantic voices. Derek spotted me first, pushing the mop across the marble, and stopped dead. The group clustered behind him. For a second, nobody spoke. Then the girlfriend stepped forward, voice shaking, and told me they had just come from court and this was insane, that I had to know this would destroy their credit, their careers, their futures. She actually begged, said they would pay whatever it took to settle, sign whatever papers I wanted, even leave early if I would just drop the liens and the clawback. Derek stood there silent for once, eyes on the floor, the fight gone out of him. I rested the mop against the wall, looked each of them in the face, and reminded them that they had signed every single clause themselves. The irrevocable trust protected the building and me as beneficiary. The personal guarantees made them jointly and severally liable. The forensic accounting had simply proven what the cameras had already recorded. I told them the accelerated timeline was their own doing. Every late-night party, every unreported damage, every attempt to bribe or intimidate staff had simply fed the machine they had built for themselves. One of the other wives started crying quietly into her hands. The husband beside her pulled out his phone and started dialing someone, probably another lawyer, but I knew from Michael's last update that their options had narrowed to 0. The restraining order now included a 50-foot buffer around me personally. Any further approach would trigger contempt charges. I picked up the mop again and went back to work, the wheels of my cart squeaking down the corridor while they stood frozen behind me. That night in my apartment, the bourbon glass sat half empty on the counter, the new court order spread out beside the growing stack of yellowed receipts and bank statements. The red light on the Ring doorbell blinked steady above my door, recording the silence that had replaced their earlier bravado. Michael called on the encrypted line to confirm the liens had already been recorded with the DMV and the credit bureaus. Their joint account remained frozen, and the bank had notified them of impending collections proceedings under the guarantee enforcement. I asked him if he thought they finally understood. He answered the same way he always did, calm, final, steel in every syllable. They signed the papers, Mom. They broke the rules. The building is yours to protect, and the law just reminded them whose name is on the deed. I hung up and sat there listening to the faint sounds of packing from upstairs, boxes scraping across floors they had ruined. The smell of fresh cardboard in defeat drifted down through the vents. They still had 42 days on the accelerated clock, but the paperwork had already done its job. The walls they had laughed at me inside were now closing in exactly as the trust had been designed to make them do. I allowed myself one small, cold smile in the quiet of my kitchen. Not triumph, just the satisfaction of a plan 9 years in the making, finally delivering the only kind of justice that ever mattered. Cold, documented, and completely irreversible. The final week arrived with a kind of crisp finality that only legal paperwork can deliver. 42 days had shrunk to 11, and the building felt like a tomb. I worked my regular night shift on the Thursday before their accelerated deadline, the wheels of my cart echoing through empty corridors, while movers hauled boxes out of 2401 under the watchful red blink of the security cameras. Michael had arranged for professional crews to handle the physical move-out so no further damage occurred, billing every hour back to their personal guarantees at the contractual rate. Another $8,700 added to the running total that now sat at $127,400. I was restocking the service closet when the elevator dinged at 2:30 a.m. All 6 of them stepped out together, Derek leading, eyes bloodshot, the others trailing like broken soldiers. They had clearly been drinking. The stale smell of bourbon and desperation followed them down the hall. Derek stopped 10 feet away, exactly the distance the restraining order required, and started talking fast. He told me they had lost their new apartment because of the liens on their credit, that collection agencies were already calling their parents, that his firm had placed him on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the judgments. His girlfriend stood beside him, makeup streaked, begging me to reconsider just the clawback portion, saying they would sign anything, pay in installments, do whatever it took if I would just lift the personal guarantees and let them keep some shred of dignity. I set the stack of towels down slowly and looked at each of them in turn. Then I reached into the pocket of my gray uniform and pulled out the final manila envelope, the one Michael's attorney had couriered over that afternoon. Inside were the updated forensic accounting summary, the court-stamped writ of execution, and the notice of impending asset liquidation for any remaining personal property still titled in their names. The irrevocable trust language allowed me, as lifetime beneficiary, to pursue full recovery without further hearings. The deed restrictions on the units now included a permanent bar against any future tenancy by any of them or their immediate family. Their joint account had been drained by the bank to cover the first $65,000. The rest would come from wage garnishment and lien foreclosures starting next month. I handed the envelope to Derek myself. He took it with shaking fingers, the crinkle of the legal documents loud in the quiet hallway. His girlfriend started crying again, louder this time, telling me I had no idea what I was doing to their lives, that this was cruel, that I was supposed to be the help and not the one holding the hammer. I reminded her that the help had cleaned their vomit while they laughed and called me trash. The help had documented every violation they thought no one would notice. The help was the named beneficiary on the trust that now owned their mistakes. Derek tried one last desperate card. He said his father was willing to settle for 80 cents on the dollar if we dropped the public filings. I told him the filings were already public record, the credit bureaus had been notified, and the only remaining negotiation was how quickly they removed the last of their belongings, before the sheriff's lockout crew arrived at noon on move-out day. The temporary restraining order had been made permanent that morning. Any further contact would mean contempt charges, impossible jail time. I turned back to my cart and resumed restocking, the beep of the security system arming behind me as I walked away. They didn't follow. They stood there in the hallway, watching me disappear around the corner. 6 shadows who had learned too late that the quiet woman in the gray uniform had never been the one without power. I finished my shift at 5 a.m., rode the service elevator down, and poured the bourbon a little heavier than usual. The half-empty glass caught the first light of dawn through the blinds while I reviewed the final bank statements on my tablet. Their shell accounts had been traced and frozen. The short-term rental proceeds, another $19,400 uncovered in the last forensic sweep, had been seized and applied directly to the balance. The total judgment now stood at $146,800, growing daily with interest at the statutory rate of 10.25%. Friday morning, the movers finished. I watched from the basement monitors as the last boxes left 2401. Derek lingered in the empty living room for a long minute, staring at the walls they had trashed, then walked out without closing the door. The girlfriend followed, shoulders slumped, carrying the Birkin bag that now looked like a prop from a life they could no longer afford. The other couples trailed behind in silence. None of them looked toward the camera. I waited until the building was quiet before I went upstairs myself. The unit smelled of fresh paint where the worst damage had already been repaired. Michael had crews in within hours of their departure. I stood in the middle of the empty space where they had once laughed at me on my knees and felt nothing but the clean satisfaction of balance restored. The manila envelope with the final satisfaction of judgment paperwork sat on the kitchen counter back in my apartment, ready for filing once the last cent cleared. That evening, Michael came by for the first time in months. He didn't stay long. We reviewed the trust documents one final time, confirmed the asset protection language had held without a single crack. Then he left me with the keys to the now vacant penthouse suite on the top floor. I told him I preferred my ground floor apartment. Visibility had served its purpose. He nodded, the same calm steel in his eyes, and reminded me the building was mine to run however I chose. No more night shifts unless I wanted them. No more pretending. I sat alone after he left, the red light on the Ring doorbell blinking above my door like a heartbeat. The yellowed receipts and bank statements had been filed away for good. The bourbon tasted cleaner than it ever had. 11 days early, the entitled tenants who had mocked the janitor mom were gone, their financial house of cards reduced to liens, garnishments, and public record. They had learned the hard way that the woman they thought was beneath them held the deed to everything they had taken for granted. I allowed myself one last cold smile as I closed the door on the empty hallway outside. No reconciliation, no second chances, just the sharp, final click of the deadbolt and the quiet knowledge that the paperwork had done what blood never could, delivered perfect, merciless justice. The building felt lighter after they were gone. I walked the empty corridors the next morning without my cart for the first time in years, the marble floors gleaming under fresh polish, the faint smell of new paint still lingering from the repairs. No more late-night laughter echoing down the halls, no more entitled demands, no more manila envelopes delivered in silence. The irrevocable trust had done exactly what Michael designed it to do, protected the asset, protected me, and turned their own signatures into the weapons that dismantled them. I spent the morning in the penthouse they had vacated, now stripped to bare walls and ready for new tenants who would never know the woman in the gray uniform held the deed. The court records showed their judgments had already hit the credit bureaus. One of the husbands had filed for bankruptcy the day before, but the personal guarantees survived that maneuver. The liens stayed. The forensic accountant's final report sat on my kitchen counter downstairs, stamped and satisfied at $152,300 recovered. The clawback on their short-term rental income had cleared the bank that morning. Every cent they had tried to hide was now mine to reinvest in the building they had treated like a disposable playground. Michael stopped by again that afternoon. We sat at my small table with the half-empty bourbon glasses between us and reviewed the trust documents one last time. He confirmed the deed restrictions now included a lifetime ban for all 6 of them and any immediate family. Any attempt to contact me or the staff would trigger the permanent restraining order and automatic contempt proceedings. I signed the final satisfaction paperwork with a steady hand, the crinkle of the pages loud in the quiet apartment. He asked if I wanted to sell the building now that the point had been made. I told him no. This place had been my cover and my shield for 9 years. It would stay mine. That evening I did something I hadn't done since the night they mocked me on my knees. I rode the main elevator to the roof deck instead of the service one. The city lights stretched out below, the same view they had paid premium rent to enjoy, while treating the woman who kept it clean like garbage. I stood at the railing with a fresh bourbon in my hand and let the cool night air wash over me. No tears, no grand speeches, just the clean, cold satisfaction of boundaries finally drawn in permanent ink. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. I hired additional night staff so I could step back from the uniform entirely. The tenants who remained treated the building management with new respect after word of the eviction spread through the resident portal. No one called me trash again. No one assumed the quiet, older woman in the lobby was powerless. I kept my ground floor apartment because I liked the privacy, but I started taking mornings off to sit in the small garden Michael had installed years earlier just for me. The stale perfume of old compromises was gone. In its place was fresh soil and the quiet knowledge that I no longer answered to anyone. Derek tried one final voicemail 3 weeks later. The message played on speaker in my kitchen while I sorted through the last of the yellowed receipts. He sounded broken, telling me his firm had let him go, that the garnishments had started on his salary, that his girlfriend had left and taken what little they had left. He asked if there was any way to settle the remaining balance privately, any mercy at all. I listened to the entire thing without expression, then forwarded it to the attorney for the contempt file. The restraining order had been clear: no contact, ever. I deleted the message and poured the last of the bourbon down the sink. The bottle went into recycling with a satisfying clink. No more need for it. The cold fury that had carried me through the paperwork war had done its job and dissolved into something quieter: freedom. 6 months later, the building ran smoother than it ever had. New tenants moved into the renovated units, their leases reviewed personally by me, with every clause bulletproof. Michael expanded the portfolio with 2 more properties, always routing the ownership through the same irrevocable trust that named me beneficiary for life. I no longer worked nights. I no longer pretended. The woman they had laughed at now signed the checks that paid every employee and approved every improvement. Sometimes I still walk the hallways at odd hours, not in uniform anymore, but in simple clothes that feel like armor. I stop outside what used to be 2401 and remember the night they pointed at me on my knees. Then I keep walking, the red light of the security cameras blinking their steady approval overhead. No reconciliation letters, no second chances, no weak forgiveness that would cheapen the justice the law had delivered with surgical precision. The entitled guests who mocked the janitor mom learned the hardest lesson of their lives. The person you dismiss as beneath you might be the one holding the deed to everything you stand on. I sleep better now than I have in decades. The manila envelopes finally gone from my counter, replaced by garden plans and quiet mornings. The building is mine, the future is mine, and the cold justice that delivered both feels exactly as it should: complete, final, and forever.